This is never business as usual with Peter Aranda. Peter is a citizen of Mexican and Native American descent and the executive director and CEO of the Consortium for Graduate Study in Management, which on its face sounds fairly innocuous, right? Collection of traditional business terms that simply lets us know he's the head man in charge, right? But behind this title is a national MBA coalition that is determined to help businesses survive its problematic tradition-based shortcomings, because everything, and I repeat, everything has a price. In today's global economy and the future we heard about this morning, no one can afford to overlook diversity. Since 1966, the consortium has awarded over $230 million in full tuition, merit-based MBA scholarships to African American, Hispanic American, and Native American MBA candidates. Let's give a round of applause for that. Yes. The 2014 MBA class will include 391 of a record 1,038 applicants for this program. This makes Aranda one of the nation's leading advocates in terms of action for diversity and inclusion in American business. Now, Aranda, he's a bit of a maverick, you know? The brother's sharp. I like his style, but he's not alone. His consortium represents more than 6,500 MBA graduates, along with the nation's top business schools and corporations, the world's largest network. It's important to know how to effect change from the inside, and Peter's going to give us some insight on that today. Why? Well, in Aranda's words, diversity is not a minority problem. It's a tremendous American opportunity. The consortium funnels diverse MBA graduates directly to companies to help them survive, thrive, and get ready for an increasingly multicultural marketplace. But these same business schools and corporations would not, and perhaps could not, do that or admit these students that they had an emerging problem that they didn't know how to address. He's going to tell us why the shifting numbers are excellent news if taken the right way and acting on it right now, doing something really immediate. Tomorrow, he'll host a breakout session entitled The Business Case for Diversity. If you're interested in figuring out some next steps, some best practices, and to what extent you can make changes in your own respective spheres of influence, Peter is the man to talk to you, and go listen. So folks, without further ado, please put your hands together for a warm welcome for Peter Aranda.
Hola. ¿Cómo están ustedes? Buenas tardes. Me llamo Pedro Aranda. ¿Hablan ustedes español, sí? Claro que sí. All right, that's as far as I'll go. Welcome. It's so great to see you. It's great to be here. It's great to have this little Wisconsin thing. Did I say it right? Wisconsin? I mean, I like to listen to kind of linguistic effects as you go around the country and hear English, American English spoken in slightly different ways, kind of based on where our original immigrants came from as we populated this great landmass. It's fascinating. If I can get my iPad to stay with my information on it, we'll be in good shape. Otherwise, I'll just ramble about who knows what. Talk amongst yourself. It just, here we go. All right, so my name is Peter Aranda in Madison, Wisconsin, or in St. Louis, Missouri for that matter. And I am the Executive Director and CEO of the Consortium for Graduate Study in Management. That's a big mouthful. We normally just say the Consortium. I want to thank UW-Madison, Patrick Sims, the Vice Provost and Chief Diversity Officer, and everyone in the audience for attending. It's great to be here. My pleasure, my honor. It seems like when I go to an academic institution, people kind of want to know what your academic background is. I'm not sure why that is, but maybe we're just immersed in academia. But I started out at the University of Southern California. Fight on. No Trojan fans out there? All right, all right. I know where I'm at, really, I do. Studied undergrad in engineering and business administration. And then I went to Washington University in St. Louis, thankfully via the Consortium, where I also studied engineering and business administration, just at the master's level. In my eastward trek across the country, I ended up at Columbia University in New York, where I studied strategic management. I've managed to leave the engineering part off at that point. And no, I'm not Dr. Aranda. I will forever be all but dissertation, but that's okay. I proved to myself that I could hang in there with the big brainy people and compete, and that's really all I needed. I'm teasing. It was really, really fun, but at some point I came to the realization that the tenure track faculty position wasn't the right fit for me. It's a great fit for a lot of people, and I applaud people who pursue that. It just wasn't the right fit for me. Professionally speaking, worked at a lot of these places don't exist anymore, so maybe you'll catch on to the trend that everywhere I go, something bad happens. But I worked at Anderson Consulting. You might recognize them now as Accenture, so it didn't really go badly. Price Waterhouse, before the consulting arm was sold to IBM. I worked at MCA in the Music Entertainment Group. Now that's part of Comcast, NBC, Universal. I had my own consulting company in the music and entertainment sector. I also worked for Bertelsmann, or BMG North America. I worked for 2 private equity bankers as a mercenary, kind of an industry specialist who goes from one company to another that they own, that these private equity banks own, that are generally in some sort of trouble and they need to be fixed so that they can get their money out of it. And so that was something I did for a while. I was a business school professor for a while. I was fortunate enough to be in a small school in Nashville called Belmont University, where they had an MBA program focused on the music industry, so it was a great fit for me. And I've been at the consortium for 11 years. That all sounds kind of good, right? If I can say so myself. But let's talk about life experiences. And I truly hope that none of you have similar life experiences, but I trust that some of you probably do. I remember being told to use the back door because of the color of my skin. I remember shopping with food stamps. It had nothing to do with the color of my skin, just plain old being poor. I remember being told to leave a convenience store because of the color of my skin. I remember laying face down in an alley, held at gunpoint by the police, and my crime was driving while brown. I remember being followed by department store detectives until they asked me to leave the department store. I remember being advised to enroll in junior college or join the military, despite the fact that I had a 4.0. Now, truth be told, I did have 1 B. It was in typing, and my mother made me do it. I did. I had 1 B, all the rest were A's, so not quite a 4.0. And SAT scores in the 99th percentile. I used to tell my test numbers, but they keep changing the scale, and my test numbers kept getting lower and lower and lower. So I'm sticking with the 99th percentile because that's where it was. I remember being considered the affirmative action hire. Anybody ever been that? I remember being the only underrepresented minority in my doctoral program class. And I remember being the only division president of color in 2 major corporations where color was irrelevant to my role. You know what I mean by that? So there was an African American who ran the black music division. There was a Hispanic or a Latin American gentleman who ran the Latin music division. And I'm not saying that they didn't have talent to run those divisions, but in part they were there because it was necessary for them to be black or Hispanic to be in that role. That's the distinction I make, anyway. So why am I here? Because my parents made me? No, I am here today to make sure that generations that follow me don't have similar experiences. and I need your help. I'm also here to challenge your thinking. I want to take you to that, outside of that comfort zone, to that place where you're just almost ready to shut down because it's too uncomfortable, but not quite there. I just want you to be uncomfortable enough to learn. Can you go there with me? And I want us collectively to reorient the collective wisdom on diversity and inclusion. And last but not least, I want to give you a reason to pause and reflect. Pause and effect. Where'd that come from? Pause and reflect. So how about a little audience participation? You ready? All right, who considers themselves to be a majority? I'd like you to stand up. Come on, be proud. Are there any consortium grads or fellows in the room? No? I was looking for some assistance, that's all. Okay, so this group considers themselves to be in the majority. Thank you. How about those who consider themselves to be a minority? Please stand. Now you noticed I remained standing the whole time. That should give you a hint, not only that I'm mixed up, but more than that. All right, thank you. Let's see if we can change these perceptions. So let me ask you some questions, and you can just raise your hand. Despite what your parents or your significant others might say, how many of you are human beings? The majority, right? You saw that, right? How many of you are over 4 feet tall? I think we got everyone. That's a majority. How many of you have an IQ over 70? Come on, be proud. 70 is what Webster says is an idiot. Come on. Come on. Be proud. How many of you have yet to earn the right to say that you're 70 years old or older? Still the majority. How many of you are U.S. citizens or permanent residents? You see, everyone's a majority. How many of you are African American? A minority today in this room. Hispanic American? Native American? I better raise my hand. Asian American? Russian American? And anyone who could raise their hand all of those times, come up here and join me because we need to be together. You are my people. Any Irish Americans, Italian Americans, mixed heritage? Any immigrants? All right, we are in the land of immigrants. You get my point. Lots of little minority groups, right? Depends on what the question is and what the context is. How many of you are over 30? All right, keep your hands up. Be proud. All right, young people, look around. My generation said, never trust anyone over 30. You saw their faces, right? You know who they are? How many of you have an IQ over 140? Come on, be proud. That's the genius mark, same dictionary. So see, everybody's a minority. That IQ and $5 will get you a cup of coffee at Starbucks, so, you know. I'm not politically correct. You can't work in diversity and inclusion and be politically correct. It would be politically incorrect to do so. Political correctness, I understand why it's there, but you have to be able to laugh at yourself. We have to be able to understand each other by asking questions that we're embarrassed to ask or we've been taught to be embarrassed to ask. Because otherwise we'll just ride this wave of momentum off into the oblivion. We'll never understand each other, and the outcome will be really bad. Let's talk about science for a minute. Is science always right? Anybody remember when science was wrong? Is the world flat? Are there big, scary monsters over there on the edge waiting to eat you if you go too far? Can animals communicate with one another? Yeah, well, not when I was a kid. We went to school and they told us in the science books that human beings were the only, and they didn't really want to call us animals, but we were the only creatures that could communicate. I know, there were dinosaurs outside still, so you weren't around, but. All right, how many races are there? And I'm talking about humanity, I'm not talking about the Olympics. There's just one, it's called the human race. Clearly, science has made some mistakes along the way, and hopefully we've learned from them. The concepts of minority and majority need to be framed by context and perspective. Everyone is both a minority and a majority. You ready to talk about diversity and inclusion finally? Finally getting to the topic? What do these terms mean? Why are they important? They're those terms that get abused a lot. Everybody's talking about diversity, and not everybody has the same definition. When we think about diversity, there's a whole bunch of different ways to measure it. Many, many different metrics, many different categories of diversity. It's certainly not only about ethnicity. But the thing that's kind of interesting to me about diversity is that it's dynamic, but at any point in time, it's really static. So we can measure the diversity, the ethnic diversity in this room right now, right? We can get out a piece of paper and count noses and figure out how many people are Americans of German descent, how many are indigenous Americans. Well, there's only one, so we don't need to get the paper out for that. Are there two? I didn't see anyone raise their hand when I asked the question, sorry. Raise your hand again. Be proud. Thank you. It's static in this room. It's static at any given point in time, and we can measure it. It's a state of being, if you will, for that moment. When we talk about human diversity from a racial, ethnic, etc. perspective, it's not just minorities, it's all ethnicities. So when people started immigrating to this country, the diversity was still there. It was a little bit different, but there were Polish and Russian and Irish and Italian immigrants. Today we think about diversity and we typically think that we're talking about minority problems, right? You'll hear me consistently say, as Patrick said, diversity is not a minority problem. It's an American opportunity. So how's that different than inclusion? Because these words get used back and forth. So remember, I said diversity is kind of a static snapshot. Inclusion is really a process. It's the means for attaining the opportunities presented by diversity. You with me? So can you think of a time in U.S. history when we really capitalized on diversity? Anyone? You don't have to be old. It was before I was born. The Industrial Revolution. So we used technology, we used engineering, we used skills with provided by American citizens, but who came from many different countries to populate the United States. And so you hear talk about German engineering, Italian styling, and on and on and on. There are many, many different examples of that. Well, to me, it's really an example of when this country was really not that strong, took advantage of the diversity, maximized the diversity that we had, and came away a leading producer in the world. Now, I think that we have that same situation today, but we're not doing a good job of capitalizing on it. So when I think of organizations, and this is a little taste of tomorrow's talk about the business case for diversity, but you think of a paradigm for diversity and inclusion. And, I don't want to, there's no politics in this. So when I say left and right, there's nothing political about it, nothing liberal or conservative. But on one end of the spectrum, you can draw it however you want. So on one end of the spectrum, you have this place of ignorance. Everybody know what that word means? Go look it up in the dictionary later, because it's different than I suspect you think. It doesn't really necessarily have the negative connotations that people use today. It just means that you don't have the knowledge. So we have organizations that are at this ignorance place in the paradigm. And on the other end of the spectrum is full acculturation. And as steps along the way from ignorance to, there's no racial or ethnic issue in this country, to awareness. Okay, there might be a problem, but it's not mine. It's not my organization. My organization's great. We treat everyone the same. Acknowledgement, okay, there is a problem, and it even exists at my organization, but we have no clue how to fix it. It's been going on for centuries, and it'll probably go on for centuries more. To a problem orientation, let's go out and find what the problem is, and then we can make that problem go away. We don't know what the solution is, but we can find the problems. That's the starting point. The next stage, solution orientation. Okay, we figured out the problems, and now we're going to solve them. The beating shall continue until morale improves. You heard that one? Okay, so we need to get to the place of acculturation, where people are sensitized to the fact that there are different cultures, whether those are cultures brought about because of immigration patterns, or just different cultures brought about by our own geography. The Plains Indians are different than the Atlantic Coast Indians, which are different than the Southwest Indians. Are African Americans in the big cities in the Midwest the same as they are in the Southeast? Are white people in Maine the same as white people in Dallas? I don't know, but I suspect that there are regional differences that, based on the culture, the environment that we live in. And so recognizing that rather than everyone's supposed to be the same, let's just start out at the place that acknowledging everyone is different. Let's try and figure out what some of those differences are, because they're pretty interesting. And let's celebrate the things that we share in common. Acculturation is where a collective celebration of diversity occurs. So why is this important to us? Demographic shifts. I think you heard a little bit about this earlier today. Hopefully I won't say anything that's in direct conflict, but that's sort of the nature of this business right now. We don't have enough data yet to know for sure, so we theorize a lot. But there are tremendous demographic shifts going on in this country. There's a leadership void. Rapidly, well, we're in it, and it's going to get bigger. Is everybody aware of that? You know what I'm talking about? there's this heightened global competition and this threat to our ability to sustain our collective culture and our way of life in the United States of America. Anybody scared? You should be. Let's talk about those demographics. According to the U.S. Census, 2013 population estimates, so you can look these up online. 310 million people living in the United States. 65% of them represent the majority. 35% represent minorities. Of those 35%, 30% of the whole population are underrepresented. The distinction is the 5% Asian American. Definitely minorities in today's environment, not always considered or typically not considered underrepresented. Let's look at the population that's 75 and older in the United States. 82% are in the majority. It's quite a change from the 65% if you look across the whole population. 18% are minority, 15% are underrepresented. If we look at the age of 45 to 65, and I think that's where our leaders are coming from, no offense to younger people, but you need a broad enough set of experiences and education before you get put into that place to lead, typically. 45 to 65 population, 73% are majority, 27% are minority, 22% underrepresented. Now, let's get extreme and look at those that are 5 and under. Who can guess what the majority number is? Anyone? I heard some good guesses. It's 54. 54% is the majority and 46% the minority and 40% underrepresented. And so we're rapidly approaching a place where realistically everyone is going to be a minority. And I think if we were thinking about ethnicities properly, we've been there all along. Does anybody, who's Hispanic? Really? I don't even know what that means. Because Mexican Americans and Puerto Ricans and Dominicans and Cuban Americans and people from Spain and Portugal and Argentina, all of those people make up what we call Hispanic. But aside from having sort of a common language, sort of like, you know, have you ever been to Scotland? Have you heard them speak English there? It's hardly recognizable. You know what I mean? So a common language, kind of, and other than Spain and Portugal, perhaps common conquerors. Well, it's not politically correct, is it? Sorry. Sorry, I'm not sorry. Other than Spain and Portugal, they have common conquerors, but you can't say that being Hispanic is being part of that's not a cultural identity. I don't even know what it means. So when you say Caucasian or white or the majority, it's the same thing. Don't you think? You think the Italians and Irish always got along? Not in my recollection. But maybe I lived in a little isolated corner somewhere. No, it's not like they're evil, but they're different, right? Different cultures, different belief systems, different values in some sense. And so we're rapidly approaching this place where we no longer have a majority. And as we continue to seemingly divide in this nation of ours and focus on smaller and smaller groups, we have to be careful because we're going to fall apart. Remember that united we stand divided we fall. What about this leadership void? What do I mean? Leaders are predominantly baby boomers because of age, right? Well, baby boomers are predominantly of the majority, also because of age and immigration patterns in the United States. And the baby boomer generation is rapidly leaving the workforce. But the population that's coming behind them not only looks different, you heard the stats, but what are some of the societal ills that are commonplace with our underrepresented populations? Come on, I'm from Missouri. We've been hearing about Ferguson, incarceration, been hearing about driving while being brown. We have poverty, we have substance abuse, we have illiteracy, we have high school dropout rates, teenage pregnancy, and broken families, all at levels that are well above the majority population. So now think for a minute. If this group of underrepresented minorities is soon to be approaching a place where, if you add them all together, they're going to be the majority, and we have these problems in our communities, what does that mean for this country? Doesn't that sound like a pretty big problem for our country? To me, it does. It doesn't sound like a problem in the hood or the ghetto or the barrio or whatever you want to call it on the res. It is a problem in those places, but it's much bigger than that. And as long as we pretend, we in this room, because this is a diverse group in a different way, we're the educated class. As long as we pretend that it's not our problem, we're in for a world of hurt. Who will lead us after the baby boomers? Let's talk about global competition. Everybody heard the word America Century? Well, America Century was from 1900 to 1999. That's the period of time where we dominated everything in the world in terms of economic strength, quality of education, educational attainment, military might, technology, you name it. If it was a positive thing, we led it. That's why it's referred to often as America's Century. The problem with America's Century is really nothing except for the fact that it's over. It ended a while ago. How many complete industries have we lost? Can you think of any? Steel, textiles, lots of them. There's lots of them to list. We've lost the whole industry. They've completely moved to another country. You see American-made TVs anywhere? We used to dominate the market for televisions. That's all there was. Zenith, RCA. We're not the best educated anymore. And our educational system is definitely not the best anymore. This concept of U.S. representing all the smart and creative people and all of the other countries representing those who make or do things. Remember that concept when Ross Perot was running for president and he said that there was going to be this giant sucking sound as all of the jobs left America? But people were saying, oh, no, we're going to be the designers and the engineers and everybody else is going to do the hard work. Guess what? Ross Perot was right, and us being the smart people isn't really even true, but it's certainly not sustainable. We have lots of foreign students attending our universities, which is a wonderful thing from a diversity perspective and a world learning perspective, and most of them go home to their home country and be smart and creative. And so when I talked about the television market, well, who owns a Samsung or an LG, right? Korean cars, Korean electronics used to be, when I was a kid, you had these three tigers. Well, they didn't call them three tigers. If you turned something over and it was a cheap thing, a tchotchke thing, something that you bought at the Empire State Building, it said made in Japan. And then Japan became too sophisticated and too expensive, and so it started to be made in Taiwan. And then it was made in Korea. But now if it says made in Korea, it's not a junky thing. It's a really good thing. And it's something that they make better than we can, or that we do anyway. So this us being smart and them not is clearly not working. And our general lack of cultural awareness and sensitivity is a major weakness in the global marketplace. We can't figure out diversity in our own country. How can we hope to understand diversity in a global sense? Well, the reality is we can't. So from a sustainability perspective, if we continue to lose our competitiveness, our products will lose market share in the global marketplace. Other people will just be making better products. Well, when that happens, guess what happens to those higher paying jobs in our economy? They go away too. And when those higher paid jobs go away, what happens to our consumption-based economy? It's hard to spend money you don't have. But here's the upside. All of that manufacturing that we lost, we'll get it back because we'll be a third world country and we'll have the low-cost labor. Think about it. Is that where you want to go? It's not where I want my children and grandchildren to go. Should we be fearful? Absolutely, but let's just be fearful enough to drive change. Because we have the intellect, we have the power, we have the might. Do we have the will? I think we do. I think we should be hopeful. And my hope will sound, a lot of people don't like this generation, but my hope really is with the millennials. Because I love that the millennials march to their own drum. I love that the millennials have a higher sense of social responsibility than my generation did. And I love that the millennials often care about things bigger than themselves. And so I'm putting a lot of weight on your young people's shoulders, but I'm expecting you to fix it. Are you up to that task? I think you are. All right, so what do we need to correct to move there? Does it sound like gloom and doom? It's not gloom and doom. I think we need to change the way we think about some things. So ethnically speaking, I'm an American Indian. Does that sound different in any way? Phil Miller, what's your ethnicity? Pick one. He's a Scottish American. Okay, well, how does that sound different than American Indian? Come on, it's not rocket science. When we say I'm an American Indian, we're saying that I'm an Indian, but I fit under this umbrella of America. I am part of America. When we say, and I'm not picking on Scottish Americans, when we say I'm Scottish American, you're saying you're Scottish first. And to me, that's backwards. So when you say you're Mexican American, Cuban American, African American, whatever it is, if you're not saying I'm an American Indian, then you guys got it backwards. I'm sorry. Let's fix that. Because I think it's more than just a simple turn of phrase. In our minds, it puts things in the wrong order. Social responsibility is not optional. It has to be a core value in our society, in our organizations, and for us as individuals. Social responsibility does not mean we're socialists or communists. It means we take care of each other and we take care of our own. It does not have to be mutually exclusive from capitalism. Who's an economist? Do we have somebody who's a real economist in the room? Economists talk about this thing where in pure capitalism, organizations will compete until they reach the point where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. That means that to the point where nobody's making any money on anything. In a world of perfect information, when nobody's making any money on anything, there is no innovation because there's no incentive for an entrepreneur. And so we have to be careful of how pure we want our capitalism to be, because if we look to the perfect end of capitalism, it's not a very perfect place. Let's set aside our differences and focus on the things that are important to our society. You heard this already, but united we stand, divided we fall. We have to have one community with common values that allow for the celebration of diversity and the retention of our ethnic and cultural heritages, plural. We must take the long-term view, something capitalists have proven to be poor at. Short-term performance metrics prevent us from doing the right thing. An annual return on investment calculation is not going to work. Our challenges and our opportunities are bigger than that. We need a comprehensive social responsibility curriculum in our schools that cover or that include diversity and inclusion as a core component from kindergarten through the completion of undergraduate programs. So how am I on time? Okay, I have a person staring at me. I could feel it. No, I'm good. She said I'm good. I'm about ready to wrap up, and then we have some time for questions or dialogue between us. So now, given this new understanding, I think that you have of minority and majority, right? Say yes. I want everyone who's in the majority to stand up. Yes, it's all of you. And I want to leave you with a quote from Mark Twain. You're already sitting down again. You have to stand up. That's the only way I get a standing ovation. Come on. All right. So this is Mark. You can sit down. It's okay. When Mark Twain says this, does anybody know who Mark Twain is? Samuel Clemens, right? He's sort of from Missouri, not really, but sort of. He said, whenever you find yourself on the side of the majority, it's time to pause and reflect. So please pause and reflect. Thank you. So I'd love to chat about whatever you want to chat about. I do have one little announcement, though. The Latino Professional Association is having an event this evening, a reception at the Fresh Market in the event room from 5 to 8 p.m. And everybody's welcome, last I heard. So if you're looking for something to do, please join us. What kind of questions do I have? No brave souls? Yes, sir.
One of the things that is behind all differences and coming together and everything else that has been shown in history time after time is that when things do separate out, when you do focus on differences and you do divide up, sooner or later you get a charismatic somebody or other to come in
Like Hitler. Well, let's not go there. Let's not go there. I think we do need a charismatic leader, but one that's not going to create an enemy within us, but unite us for common good. Right now, I feel like our political parties are trying to demonize one another, and at the end of the day, I have a great difficulty distinguishing between either party. And it seems like the voters feel the same way as we kind of swing the pendulum this way, then that way, and then the other way. What we're really saying is that we just don't support what you guys are doing. We don't really care if you're Republican or Democrat. We just want change, good change. So I hope it's not that kind of leader that we get next. That would be a bad thing. Yes, that understatement, I apologize. I'm sarcastic and sometimes caustic and rarely politically correct. And nothing else? Yes, sir.
You said earlier something about how businesses and a case for diversity, where businesses can utilize diversity, inclusion to be successful. Can you think of some current examples of what you've seen of other businesses currently that you think have done a good job at that?
Well, it's been kind of fueled by the academic side. A lot of faculty have, in the management side, have been doing research on the best functioning teams and what the best way to come up with product innovation or service innovation or process innovation. And they found that diverse teams almost always lead to a better outcome. It may not get there faster in terms of product launch, but over the course of the life cycle of the product, it's a better product once it's delivered and more sustainable. And so I think that when you look at some of the new vehicle innovation from American car makers, General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler, they've been big proponents of these diverse teams. And I don't just mean ethnic diversity, I mean diversity in all kinds of interesting ways, socioeconomic, type of education, where you grew up geographically, where you grew up, urban versus rural versus suburban. And they've been working with these diverse teams to come up with a better process, to come up with better products. And I would say that there's a fair bit of success. The American auto manufacturers are in a much better place than they were 20 years ago. And interestingly enough, the companies that were dominating over those American manufacturers, the pendulum has seemed to swung a little bit the other way. That would be my best example. I think there are other examples where it's not necessarily because the companies were so smart, but it's because their customers or their clients were so demanding. And so when we think of business-to-business type companies, investment banks, consulting companies, real estate development companies, they're embracing diversity for the first time in many instances because their big customers who used to be CEOs, or still are CEOs, but CEOs used to all be male and white. And now the CEOs are, you see women, you see people of color. It's still unbalanced, but it's changing. And even if the CEOs are male and white, they're saying, my shareholders value diversity, and so please, Mr. Investment Banker, show me the diverse team that's going to help me do my spin-off of this division, who's going to help take my company public, who's going to do whatever other projects that investment bankers do. And because of that pressure, these B2B organizations are becoming more diverse and they're embracing it. So it's more because the market's demanding it. Does that make sense? What else? Yes, ma'am.
What was your greatest life experience that you could, well, probably hard to listen to answer, but where you, all the things that you described that you went through, and you were able to pull someone from your family and community and pull them out of the wisdom in their age, and then go into the arena of education and stand at the front of the line and pull those two worlds together as far as wisdom and knowledge and all the things that you listed as far as the equity achievement, the injustice and all the pain and the trauma in your life that made you rise up from that little boy to the man to say, here's an elder within my community and here's an elder within this community, and bring those two worlds together as far as knowledge and you are achieving your life.
I think that not just in my life, but that experience is happening more and more frequently, and when you use the term elder, it resonates with natives in a very distinct way, and so for a long time, Indian nations were sending their young people out to get educated, and they weren't coming back. And then more recently, they started coming back, but not being received with open arms because somehow they changed, and they went from being that young person with promise to some kid who thinks they're smarter than everyone else. And I think now we're beginning to get to that place where the value is being seen in the fact that, yes, we did change when we left and sought education, and it's impossible for you to go home and everything be the same. Part of that has happened because of time and experience in those elders. The current group of elders are more familiar with the outside world, and so they can understand it a little bit better. But it happens with regularity now, and I think that it will continue to happen more so. The other thing I was going to say, one of the other reasons that drives it, at least from my perspective, is that today more than half of Native Americans live off the reservation, which is a fairly new phenomenon. Up until a decade ago, the majority was on the reservation and therefore not very integrated into mainstream or majority environments. I can't speak for other cultures, but I know that in my own. I wish my grandfather had lived to see that. But what else? Well, we're right on time. I think so. If there are no other questions, I'm going to let you go. I'll bring Patrick back out, and he will send us in the right direction.